Okay. So question is, do you go forward or go back? I want to go back for a second. Sort of go a little bit of the big picture again. I'm only doing it because yesterday I had the chance to read the story because we read the story in shul. And then I'm reading it, and of course the question, the real question is, what is Judah doing with all these verses? He gives a whole speech from verse 18 on page 251, Genesis chapter 44, verse 18, and he goes all the way from 18 to verse 34. Okay, so 16 verses. And at the end of that speech, it says Joseph could not restrain himself, and he basically told the Egyptians to leave, and he made himself known to his brothers. What was it in the speech? There's 16 verses. You could figure, you could say anything. So we've been talking about this in the past couple of weeks, but here's what I think is a different angle. So the general angle that most people say, we said it here 10 times, is that Judah's waiting for the brothers to show that they repented. How would they show that they repented? When they would stick up for Benjamin and protect Benjamin at their own expense. And that would be the correction of the sale of Joseph, where they sacrificed the son of Rachel for their own good. Here they would sacrifice their own good for the son of Rachel, which is Benjamin. He's waiting to see that transformation. That's many commentaries go with that theory, and I think it's a wonderful theory. I'm not here to negate that. I just want to add something. What do I want to add? Sometimes when we read the story, we heard it so many times, we imagine in our mind what actually happened, and it's very different. It's different than what the verses say. And I was surprised to read this year. When I'm reading it, I went back, and it could be I'm wrong, but as far as I can tell, I'm not wrong. And what I'm going to say now is the fact. Later, we can just debate what the interpretation of the facts are. But the fact is the fact. The fact is, Bob wants to study. Okay, so we're laying out the fact, and then we can debate the interpretation of the fact. So the fact is that last week's parsha, when Joseph accuses the brothers of being spies, and they say we're not spies, and they say we were 12 brothers, and they give the whole speech of family history, and they come back and forth. They never tell Joseph the very, very simple thing they're telling him now. They never tell Joseph. When Joseph says, bring Benjamin. Okay, let me ask a question for him, if anybody wants to jump forward. When Joseph says to the brothers, I think you're spies, prove to me that you're not spies, bring Benjamin. What should the brothers respond?
Yes, we'll bring Benjamin.
That's what they responded. What's an alternative response?
We're not spies.
They said that too. What about Benjamin?
He's not a spy.
Benjamin's not here. What are they saying now? Now they're saying, you can't keep Benjamin because our father is going to die if we don't bring him back. So what should they told him then? They should have told him what they're telling him now. It says, bring Benjamin. He said, we can't. In other words, he's too connected to his father. That's what they should have said. Now, we never know what if. If they would have said that then, maybe he would have said, okay, forget it, don't bring Benjamin. In other words, last parsha, they don't tell the emperor, when Joseph says, bring Benjamin, they don't say, sorry, he's too connected to his father, he's going to hurt his father. They don't say that. Instead, they say, no problem. They said exactly what Neil said, we're going to go bring Benjamin. They go back to the father. They said, the guy who accused us of spies told us to bring Benjamin. Father says he's not going. I don't care if we all die of hunger. Why didn't they think of that? Why didn't they say, our father's never going to send Benjamin? Okay. So maybe theory I'm putting forward. So that's a fact. Last parasha, they don't tell Joseph, we can't take Benjamin away from his father. They don't say that they have a special connection. They don't say any of that. Okay. All of a sudden, this week, once the goblet was planted in Benjamin's bag, and Joseph says, okay, Benjamin is going to stay as a slave. Then Judah gets up his whole speech and he says, you can't take away Benjamin from his father. And he keeps saying it's going to harm the father. And our father said, I had 2 sons. One was taken away. If this one's taken away, he's surely going to die. And he goes, Father, 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 count the word Father 7 times. But you know that when it says something 7 times, that's probably the common word. Okay, so they didn't mention father last parsha. This parsha, they break Joseph down by saying father, 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 saying Benjamin cannot be taken away from his father. Okay, so what's the theory? The theory, so that those are facts. Everything I said till now is a fact. You can't, you can't. I don't think you can prove me wrong. Maybe you could if you tell me that I missed a verse. But I think that's the fact. What's stringing these facts together? So an alternative reading of the story, like I said, is not so much that, and so one interpretation, one reading, one general reading is that the transformation that the brothers have to go through is now to realize to protect the sons of Rachel. And that would correct the fact that they sold the son of Rachel, Joseph, as a slave. So that's one perspective. The perspective that I want to offer now is no. The perspective is the transformation comes instead of thinking about themselves, they should think about their father. When they sold Joseph, yes, it was a crime against Joseph too. And again, the teshuvah is that when they stick up for Benjamin, they're repenting against the crime of, they're transforming themselves and repenting against the crime of against Joseph. What about the crime against Jacob? Even in Miket's last parsha, when the emperor, when Joseph accuses them of being spies, and you know what they say? They realize we're in trouble. What do they say? They say we're guilty. We're guilty because of our brother, because when he pleaded to us, we ignored him. Therefore, this calamity is befalling us. That's the quote. Well, even when they know they did something wrong, how do they define the sin? The sin is against our brother. It's wonderful. That's a true sin, 100%. What about the sin against their father? They don't mention it. In other words, these people, these brothers, they commit a terrible crime to their brother, but there's also a terrible crime to their father. They don't realize that. They don't realize their father's pain. They have not realized the father's pain. And therefore, when Joseph says, bring me Benjamin, they don't even anticipate that the father's going to have trouble with that. They should have said right away, we can't do it. It's going to harm our father. They didn't say that because they didn't realize that it's going to harm their father. Only when they come back and they say, we want, could you bring Benjamin so we can buy more bread? Joseph says, no way, it's not happening. And Jacob says, no way, it's not happening. You're not getting Benjamin. And then when they come back down, they have the story. And then finally, when all else fails, Judah has to say to Joseph, you can't, I'm going to stay instead because if Benjamin goes away, if Benjamin is taken away, it'll be too much pain for our father. And then again, he says, father, 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 father. In other words, the repentance is he recognizes the pain of the father. Now, I already said this in the past, that it's not so clear what Benjamin says, what Joseph says when he reveals his identity. He says, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? What do you mean, is my father still alive? Didn't the brothers say that he is already that he's alive? Yes. He never, but it could be he's just mirroring what Judah says. Judah says, our father, our father, our father. And now he says, oh, is our father still alive? It's like, oh, the father is in the picture? Oh, you are paying attention to your father? Now I could tell you who I am because I'm connecting to my father as well. In other words, my point is that there's one way of reading the story is between the transformation. The key transformation happens between Joseph and that the brothers are protecting the son of Rachel, Benjamin. In other words, that they don't make the same mistake. They don't sell their brother. That's one way of thinking about the transformation in the story. Another way of thinking about the transformation is they never thought about their father. Only here, and again, Miketz, the entire last parsha, where we realized they committed a sin. They realized that they sinned and therefore this calamity befell us. Everything is fine and good, but they don't even mention a sin against their father. Only in this parsha, for the first time, do we see that they realize that they hurt their father. And the moment they start thinking about their father, Joseph has to break down because he realizes that he's hurting his father as well. So that is alternative reading, and I think that's a possibility. Go ahead.
He knew he was hurting his father years ago
By what?
by not getting in touch.
Let's put that question aside. But I'm talking about by taking away Benjamin. No one ever told the brothers don't say, sorry, you can take away Benjamin, you're going to kill the old man. They don't say that. So let me go back for a second. We know the story, so it's hard for us to be the story. If you're of Joseph and your 10 brothers show up, that's all you know, all the information. You don't have access to Wall Street Journal, you don't have access to the internet. All you know is what they say. Okay? So we were talking about this in the past, that the first thing that he says, why does he accuse him of being spies, bring Benjamin? The first thing that he sees, when he sees 10 brothers, what does he see? He says, with no Benjamin. So he doesn't see them. He says what jumps out at him is Benjamin's not here. What does he think in his mind? Maybe they killed him. So the first thing is bring Benjamin. He doesn't hear them talking about their father. They say our father's alive. He doesn't hear them talking about the father. From his perspective, maybe the father's alive, maybe the father's dead. We don't know. They don't talk about him. And there's no reason for him to assume that taking away Benjamin is going to create this extraordinary pain. He would assume they would tell him if that's the case. You see what I'm saying? I'm just saying it's just glaring. The omission is glaring. There's no mention of father in the entire last parsha. Even when like I said, only in this parsha do they say father, 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 father. He breaks down, is my father. So what I'm trying to say is that there were two transformations. I don't know which one is dominant, but one way to read the story is that what he was waiting for is to see that they recognize the pain they caused their father, and they regret that, and that's the teshuva, and then he could reveal his identity. So that's a different story. It's either teshuva to the brother or teshuva for what they did to the father. And now we'll take Vicky's question, and then I'll try to make a general point. But I think that's a big point. That's what I was busy with last parsha. I'm going to confess. Yesterday when we read the Torah, I'm going to confess. I didn't really follow when the rabbi was reading this week's portion. I was busy reading last week's portion, making sure that my theory is true, making sure that they didn't really mention the father last week. And I could not believe it. I had to read once, read twice, read three times. I was like, whoa, they never mentioned their father. Like they never mentioned, sorry, we can't bring Benjamin. It's going to harm our father. And it's even more that it could be they didn't even realize. Only when they come back and they say, oh, technicality, we got, by the way, accused us of being spies. That's no fun. But we're going to bring Benjamin. It's not going to be a problem. And the father says, no way, you're not bringing Benjamin. And they're like, oops, we missed that. We missed that point. That's part of the sin. That's part of the sin, that they're oblivious to the father's pain. Had they not been oblivious to the father's pain, Joseph wouldn't have been sold. Forget about Benjamin. Okay, go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I like your theory very much. I think it's very insightful and very true. I just want to add one detail to it. It is impossible for them not to realize that when they bring the coat dipped in blood, father doesn't feel any pain. They did realize it, but they they just didn't feel that pain, and they didn't want to admit to it. Or maybe they felt it, but maybe some of the brothers did, but they just didn't want to admit, especially in front of Joseph. But I do like your theory a lot.
Let me say a few things about that. When they sold Joseph, they did not consider the father. After they sold Joseph, then they realized, oops, we have a problem. The old man's going to be upset. And it's not so much he has pain, it's he's going to blame us. So what do? Welcome. What do? They don't say, they don't do anything to diminish the father, diminish the father's pain. The cover-up is to protect themselves. It's not to protect the father. Had they felt the father's pain beforehand, they would not sell Joseph. That's one thing. And secondly, the fact that when Joseph says, bring Benjamin, when the emperor says, bring Benjamin, and they don't say, I'm sorry, we can't, it's going to kill our father. I would think in retrospect, that's what Judah would have said. Had Judah known, remember, Judah could write a speech like this in the beginning of this parasha of Vayigash. Judah could make a speech from Genesis chapter 44. He could say verses 18 to 34. He can give this whole speech saying, we cannot take Benjamin away from our father because that would bring calamity to our father. And our father already lost one son. And if he loses the second one, he's going to be dead. Judah, who could make such an impassioned speech, you would expect and say, why didn't he mention that the first time when the emperor says, bring your brother? So my answer perhaps is, the theory here, maybe right or maybe wrong, but the theory is, they're not thinking about their father's perspective. Nothing has changed. Even when they realize they sinned against Joseph, they don't say we sinned against Joseph and we sinned against our father. So my point is, I don't have no evidence that they really cared about the father's pain. The first time I see they cared about the father's pain is when Joseph says, Benjamin is going to stay here. And then Judah gets up and says, impossible. That's going to kill our father. And like I said, our father in plural, he says more times, but my father, he says 7 times, my father, my father, my father. And he's banging on the word father. And finally, Joseph says, the kids actually realized that they're taking the father's pain into account. That's the teshuvah, that's the transformation. And that's when he says, is my father still alive? Now, finally, we can talk about our father. So again, I'm not saying this is the only way to read the parasha, but I'm saying I think this is a theory that works. I don't say it works. It covers a lot of ground. It gives us, it explains. there's an overarching story based on this theory, so I like it. Now I'm putting it out there. If anyone wants to shoot it down, like you say in Russian, I think Pajalista. Go ahead.
Well, I support it wholeheartedly. I just couldn't imagine that they didn't feel their father's pain at all. Maybe they didn't want to admit it, but some
When
of
do
the
kids,
but
okay, this
all
is
of
a side
them-
question. When do kids feel their parents' pain? Oops. I don't, I mean,
Good
I don't
point.
know.
But maybe they were given an indication when Joseph was disappeared.
Yeah.
The father was inconsolable.
He's inconsolable,
So
but
that's
a fact. The question is, if how's it affect them? The old man is sad. What does it got to do with me? They're not in pain by their father's pain. And the proof is in the pudding. The proof is if Judah is so impassioned here, why couldn't he say it before? Say something. Say, listen, he's an old man. Let's leave him alone. Say something. He says nothing. They say, bring Benjamin. No problem. No problem. Your father's so connected to him. Your father wouldn't even let him go, even though he knew that's his only way of getting food. If they understood the father's perspective and the father's pain, they would have said something, I think. And all of a sudden now, they realize but Judah's speech, again, the fact of the matter is, doesn't really matter what's going on in their heart. Okay, it does matter. But this is the first time Joseph hears them talking about the father's pain. That's a fact. That's a fact. And my argument is perhaps that's the transformation. That's what he was waiting for. Because he didn't hear them say it earlier. Throughout the entire time. Remember, even when they came, when they partied and they drank, they didn't say, we got to rush back. You know, this guy, this kid, this father's waiting for him. Like they say in Yiddish garnish, they don't say anything. So I think that's a theory.
Yeah, that's a beautiful theory, Rabbi. I just want to have one more question.
Yes.
Does the fact that his mother wasn't alive, their mother is not alive, plays into it?
Yeah, it does say it's not so much that they're vulnerable because remember they're adults at that point, but the reality is that Jacob loved Rachel more than everybody and all the other wives. So in some sense, again, I'm not a psychologist or but in some sense, it's possible that to him, his love to Rachel is transferred to Rachel's children. So, in some sense, if Benjamin dies, it's like Rachel dies again. When Joseph is taken away, it's like Rachel dies again. When Benjamin dies, it's like she'll die again. So he does mention, you know that my wife, if you read at Genesis page 251 of the Art Scroll, chapter 44, verse 27, he says as follows. He says, Judah is recounting the conversation with his father. He says, then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore my two sons to me. One has left me, and I presume the last he has surely been torn to pieces, for I have not seen him since. So should you take this one too from my presence, and disaster befall him, then you will have brought down my hoariness and evil to the grave. In other words, he is mentioning, you know that my wife gave birth to two sons, which is actually interesting because he had 4 wives and he had 12 sons, right? How are the other brothers supposed to see? He says, my wife gave birth to 2 sons. No, you meant one of your wives gave birth to 2 sons. But his perspective, that's his wife, and from his perspective, he has 2 sons, even though he has 12. But that just shows how connected he is to Joseph and Benjamin and Rachel. And the point is that the first time Judah is raising this information. So my argument is he didn't realize that himself. The first time when Judah says, when Joseph, they don't know he's Joseph, but when he says, bring your brother Benjamin so I'll know you're not spies, my guess based on this theory is Judah didn't anticipate that would be a big problem. Okay, we'll go to our father. We'll tell our father to bring Benjamin. We'll bring Benjamin. We'll buy bread. We'll come home. What's the big deal, right? Then he gets home and he says, oops, I didn't realize we're in trouble here. Father is so connected to Benjamin. And now he tells that to Joseph. And now he realizes this is part of the repentance. Now he realizes the pain that they caused to their father. And that could be the turnaround. That's the theory. Go ahead, Bob, please.
Well, I haven't
ahead.
finished. I mean, you didn't answer my question.
Yeah.
About Rachel, because she already died.
Years
right?
ago.
So
Yeah.
years ago. So is that fact important for them, for the brothers? Because the brothers have only one parent to support them, and were upset.
No, their
because
mothers. Yeah, remember, there are 4 wives, 12 brothers, 4 wives. So Judah's mother is Leah. Leah should be still, yeah, Leah is, I presume Leah is still alive. I presume Leah is still alive, but Leah is not Joseph or Joseph or Benjamin's mother, right?
Right,
So
right,
these
right.
brothers are really half brothers. They're not, they're not full brothers.
Right.
They're half brothers.
So they're not afraid to upset the mother because mother is not there.
Mother's not there.
That's for sure.
My
That's for
point
sure.
is, they're not thinking about the parents. They're thinking about themselves. What's the big deal? They had 6.
Not
Yeah.
here.
6 plus Dina plus a daughter. Yeah. Yeah. The point here is that that's maybe the overarching, maybe again, there's 2 theories, there's 2 general theories about the story. One is that the transformation has to come and when they realize the pain they caused to their brother. That's certainly true. But I'm adding here that it's possible that part of the transformation is they realize the pain they caused to their father. And they didn't care about that pain. They knew about it, yes. They didn't care about it. They certainly, yeah, it certainly didn't affect them in that deep way. And I think that's now Judah realizes it, and now Judah hammers home that point that we recognize that we need Benjamin because it's going to cause our father pain, and then Judah and then ultimately that's what breaks Joseph down. If you want to talk about the last words that Judah says before he breaks down. For how can I go up to my father if the youth is not with me, lest I see the evil that will befall my father? Again, the last words he says is father. As soon as that's what breaks Joseph. And in continuation to those verses, Joseph says, "I'm Joseph, is my father still alive?" But the conversation is father. So maybe that's the big idea here. Go ahead, Bob, please.
I also want to give a rousing endorsement to your theory, but also will answer a lot of the questions that I've often posed to you about why are we having such a lengthy amount of biblical real estate to the Joseph story. I mean, here we have creation in a few psukim, and we've had 3 sidras of the Joseph story. So I think within it are so many universal lessons. One is as to your point, who respects parents until they've gotten a little older? Why do we have Yehuda and Tamar's story smack in the middle of all this? Well, he kind of feels pain for children and grandchildren and whatever. So I think your theory really lends not only to the specific, but the much more universal stories that we're learning here about teshuvah, about caring about Benjamin, about honoring their father. So I think that herein lies many of the messages that the Joseph story lends itself to.
I agree. And the reality is that honoring parents is in the top 10. It's in the 10 Commandments. It's not. It's seen as an important principle of the Jewish way of life. So it's not just one of the 613, right? It's one of the 10. We talk about the fact that the 10 Commandments could be divided into 5 and 5. 5 of them, the first 5 that were on one tablet, are basically commandments that relate to the person and God.
And that honoring the father and mother is on that list.
On that. So in other words, honoring father and mother is not just an obligation toward, it's not just considered as a humane mitzvah of sort of showing gratitude to the person who raised you, it's brought you into the world, etc. But it's also a spiritual concept. It's also highlights your connection to God, because parents represent the fact that Nachmanides talks about this. Now, parents represents the fact that you have a source, you come from somewhere. And if you start extrapolating backward, you realize that ultimately the parent of everything, the source of everything is God.
Right.
Or the other interpretation is the fact that to create a child, the Talmud says there are 3 partners, there's father, mother, and God. So in other words, the fact that the parents can give birth is an expression of the godly power, of divine power. So honoring parents is basically honoring the divine power that is within them. So even though they themselves may not be the most righteous, and maybe they're not perfect, but that's not the point. The point is that they have a godly power to create the idea of procreation, and that's what we honor when we honor our parents. So the point is, yes. So if this is this is certainly a big idea in the Torah in general. So this could be one of the big themes of Joseph's story.
And the fact that Miketz had 0 mention of Av,
Yes.
And
Yeah.
here we have 7. It's
Yes.
clearly an aha moment.
Yeah,
It's
and
that
it's 7
transformation,
yeah, and it's 7 so condensed. It's one
right,
after the other. Boom, boom,
one
boom.
after the other.
It's actually more than 7. If you say Avinu, our father. Avinu is my father. Avi, my father. There's 7 in a row. And then
Yeah, it's
Joseph
just
says,
like in the 4th Aliyah, right?
yeah, and then Joseph says, I am Joseph, is my father still alive? He's mirroring what Judah says. He's mirroring what Judah says, subconsciously or subconsciously, right? That guy says, my father, my father, my father. He says, my father. He should have said, our father. Okay, fine. But the point is, you see, those words impacted him, and that's why he repeats them, I think. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
I think part of why this section is so important, at least is based on something that I've heard, which is why we're called Jews, although occasionally they talk about us as being members of the Abrahamic faith. And I think that at least what I've heard, and you can clarify it, is that it's because of Judah that we're called Jews, and that the essence of Judah was someone who was able to grow and change, see his faults and improve, and that is perceived to be the essence of Judaism. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I 100%. So you're right. The fact that we're called Jews is because we're from Judah. Now, the reality is that in biblical times, up to relatively, all the books of the Bible were never called Yehudim, were never called Jews. There's only one book of the Bible where we refer to as Jews, and that's the book of Esther, the story of Megillah, which is the act after the destruction of the first temple. So in other words, up to that point, there were 12 tribes. Now, we're referred to as Jews. That the historic reason is because the 10 tribes in the northern kingdom, there was a split, and 10 tribes seceded and formed the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom was Judah and Benjamin, and the northern kingdom was destroyed and lost. So now most of the Jews we know are either from Judah or from other members of other tribes that were within the kingdom of Judea. So that's why we're Jews. That's the historical reason. But there's also a more, if you want to go beyond the history, you want to talk about what is the spiritual significance of that name. And that's what the Talmud gives different reasons, is why are all Jews called Jews? It's actually very funny because the first time the term Jew for a Jew was mentioned is in the scroll of Esther. And it's a very funny verse. It says, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira. There was a Judean man in Shushan, the capital, gives us his name, Shema Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi ben Kish, Ish Yemini, a Benjaminite man. So in the beginning of the verse, he's a Judean man. At the end of the verse, he's a Benjaminite man. In other words, even at that point, we mentioned his specific tribe. We also call him a Jew. And why Jew encapsulates the core of a Jew? Why Judah encapsulates the core of a Jew, of a son of Israel? Because in the Bible, we're Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. So there are different theories, and your theory is one that people say. And it also relates to the fact why Judah becomes the leader. And the leader, it's very interesting. Leader is, we don't look for perfection. Saul was much more perfect than David. But Saul doesn't take responsibility. When he makes a mistake, he doesn't acknowledge that he made a mistake and doesn't grow from the mistake. And that's why he loses the kingship. And David has his own share of mistakes, but when confronted, just like his great-grandfather Judah, when confronted, he takes responsibility and he grows from that experience. And that's the nature of a Jew. We have no claim for perfection. We hope that over time we could grow and improve and take responsibility, and that comes with a certain degree of humility. And Hoda'ah, Yehudah, Judah represents the idea also in Hebrew of acknowledgement, of thanking. That's all related to humility, and humility is a very important ingredient to growth. There's no growth without humility. So yes, that's good. Thank you. Okay, now that we have these two theories, give me 2-3 minutes. We'll try to put all the theories in together. Should we do that? We'll try to make one theory of all the theories, and then it's time to move on, I think. Okay, so we're talking about the transformation of the brothers and the transformation of Joseph. Transformation of Joseph, as we said a few weeks ago. We spent an hour on that, so I'm not going to do this more than 30 seconds. Transformation of Joseph is, when he was very young, 17 years old, he was the center of the picture. And as time progresses, he brings Hashem more and more into his life. And he realizes that his success comes from Hashem, to the extent that when he comes before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, I heard you're an expert dream interpreter, because he already had a resume. He already had a track record. He says, no, it's not me, it's God. Biladai, it's not me, it's God. And then in the interpretation, he keeps mentioning God and God and God. So that's Joseph's transformation. Take yourself out of the picture. In the first dream, he's the center, everyone's bowing to him. Joseph's, I don't want to say transformation, but development. Joseph's spiritual development is from himself being in the center, in the center of the picture. He realizes that God is the center. That would take an hour, but that, let's keep that for a second. That's 30 seconds. That's good. Based on what we said today, the development of the brothers is there in the center of the picture. Over time, the growth is they realize that there's somebody else in the center of the picture. In this case, their father. You're not the center of the universe in this story. You're a member of the story. You have a part in the story, but look at the story from another person's perspective in the sense of what's happening to the father. And that's how you see both Joseph and the brothers develop as people. But now we put all the stories together. Now I'll give you 60 seconds. I'm going to say, so what's the overarching period of this? What's the overarching point? So the overarching point is like this. You had a specific conflict between Joseph and the brothers. And the conflict could be boiled down to the fact that they're very different and they have different styles. And I don't want to rehash everything we said in the past, but the brothers felt that Joseph's path is a threat to their own. They continue the path of the patriarchs of being shepherds. Joseph was very interested, and you could see in his life, he's able to run the economy. He doesn't have to be secluded and separated from the world, from society like the shepherds were. If you're a spiritual seeker, you love to be a shepherd. It's a great occupation for a spiritual seeker. All you have to do is sit and play your flute or your harmonica and take care of sheep. It doesn't take a lot of effort. When I was traveling in Israel in the West Bank, you could see like an Arab kid, like 6 years old, with like, I don't know, 100 goats. It's not very labor intensive. You could sit there, you could fall asleep, and your goats will be just fine. And so that's what that's why the patriarchs and the tribes were all shepherds. And Joseph is not so interested in being outside society. He's interested in affecting society. And the brothers see that as a conflict without rehashing everything here. The point is, there's a spiritual conflict between the two. The truth of the matter is that you have to see it from the overarching perspective. From the father's perspective, these are two few branches within Judaism, within the same truth, all achieving the same goal. So in other words, from the brother's perspective, initially, it was, my brother's different than me. That's an attack on me. That's a conflict to me. From the father's perspective, no, you're all part of a greater story. And if you're all part of a greater story, then each person has a part in that greater story. And the differences are not a conflict. The differences actually are what creates what creates the story. In other words, the differences are enhance the whole. But in other words, Joseph and the brothers see themselves as separate initially and conflicting. And the point is, from the father's perspective, they're all part of one whole. If they're part of one whole, the differences are supposed to enhance each other. Now, when they bring their father back into their picture, when they sense the father's pain, that reminds them that what? That we are siblings. What does it mean? We're part of the same story. We're part of the same family. So it's not just physically, but also spiritually. The differences that we have is okay because we're all part of the same whole. We have the same overarching goal. The way to achieve that goal, we have different paths. But in other words, my argument is the fact that they're putting their father back in the center allows for them to make peace between them and their brother, because from the father's perspective, they're all part of the same whole. They're all part of the same story. And therefore, the differences are actually not in conflict. But that's only if you see yourself as one whole. Otherwise, if you see yourself as competing stories, then the fact that Joseph is being selected and the fact that the father obviously adores Joseph, that would mean if they take it as the fact is they're being rejected. But it's not so. It's that we're all part of the same story. He may be the leader, but his job is to look out for everybody. We're all part of the same story. So all I'm adding here is that putting their God and their father back into the picture, what that does for us is that shows that we're all part of one story. If we're all part of one story, our differences are not a conflict. That is, I think, tying all the pieces together. And it took us about 8 weeks to get here, but I think we got here. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so that is the story. He reveals his identity. He tells them, as we discussed in the last weeks, he says, don't be upset. He says, you did not send me here. We discussed this last week. I don't want to go into it again. In any case, he tells them, if you look at Genesis chapter 252, chapter 55, verse 8. No, we did it at verse 8. He says, verse 9, page 255 in the Art Scroll, he says, hurry, go up to my father and say to him, so said your son Joseph, God had made you master of all of Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You will reside in the land of Goshen, and you will be near to me, and your sons, your grandchildren, your flock, and your cattle, and all that is yours. And I will provide for you there, for there will be 5 more years of famine, so you do not become destitute, you, your household, and all that is yours. In other words, we know the story. We know there were Pharaoh's dreams were that there were 7 years of plenty, and then followed by 7 years of famine. 2 years of the famine already passed. Right, it took time for the Jacob and his household to deplete of their food, to get hungry. Then they went down once, then they went down twice. That whole story took about 2 years, and now he says there's 5 more years. So Joseph tells his father, "Come down, because there's 5 more years to the famine." And then he talks about we cry. We did the crying last week. We did that last week. I just remember we did that last week. So that's what they do. They go and he gives garments to the family. He gives them gifts. He sends gifts to his father. If you turn to page 257, they tell Joseph, they tell the very emotional story to page 257, verse 16, chapter 45, verse 26. And they told him, saying, so I'll read verse 25. They went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob, their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and that he is the ruler of all the land of Egypt. But his heart rejected it, for he could not believe them. However, when they revealed to him all the words that Joseph had spoken to them, and he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, then the spirit of the father Jacob was revived. And Israel said, how great! My son Joseph still lives. I have to go and see him before I die. So that is the end of chapter 55. He says first he doesn't believe. He doesn't believe after 25 years, after 22 years, when he's told that Joseph is alive. Not only is he alive, but he's a ruler of all the land of Egypt. And he doesn't believe them initially, but later he listens to what they said, and he saw the wagons that Joseph sent. So wagons, I guess, have something tangible. And then he knows it's true, and the spirit of Jacob is revived. So there's a very interesting medrash that Rashi quotes. And what does it mean? He saw the wagons. Agalot. He saw the wagons. So you saw wagons. Anybody can send wagons, right? You hire an Uber. You have wagons. So he sees the wagons that Joseph sent. So the simple interpretation is, I guess they're royal wagons, right? He sees that they sent the royal wagons. Maybe it has a symbol. My son was walking home from shul yesterday, and when you're that height, 4 years old, you see things that most people don't see. So on the garbages, it sounds crazy, but on the garbages on Greenwich Avenue, there's the symbol of the town of Greenwich. The town of Greenwich, the symbol of the town of Greenwich, I never saw it till yesterday, is the guy riding the horse. I imagine it's General Putnam. That's my guess, but he's guy riding the horse. So he was fascinated by the horse, and we passed the Greenwich Avenue on Millbank. He's like, no more garbages. I said, I'm sorry, I apologize. There's no more garbages. The point is, there's a seal. Maybe they had a seal on, and he sees that these are the chariots of Pharaoh. So it must be true that Joseph is the second in command to Pharaoh, because he has access to the royal chariots with the signets, maybe with the seals, maybe. But Rashi has a midrashic interpretation, and it says there's 2 things that the verse says. It says they told him the words of Joseph, verse 27. They related to them all the words that Joseph had spoken to them, and he saw the wagons. So Rashi says like this: there is a agalot, could be wagon, but it's also the same letters as eglah, which is calf. And basically what Rashi says is that Joseph sends a sign to Jacob that only Jacob could have known, that only Joseph could have known this. And therefore, Jacob knows that indeed Joseph is alive, and Joseph sent this message. What was the message? The message was that the last thing they studied, remember, 10 of the brothers were initially, Beginning of the story. 10 of the brothers went out to graze the sheep. Joseph is with his father. They're studying Torah. When the father sent Joseph off to go see his brothers, that's what the Torah says. He says, Lechna re'eh et shlom achecha, go see the welfare of your brothers. And that's what he departs from his father for the final time, 22 years ago. Says the Medrash, they were studying Torah. What were they studying? They were studying the laws of Eglah Arufa. Eglah Arufa, which is, Eglah is a calf, Arufa means beheaded calf. Strange law. What's the law of the beheaded calf? I don't know if it's the most known, but in Deuteronomy, there's a mitzvah. The mitzvah is what happens if you find, I'm sorry?
Yeah, if you find a dead
Find a dead body and you don't know who killed the body. So what you should do is you take first of all, you bring the high court and they measure the corpse to the closest city. You find the closest city. The elders of that city have to take a calf and they have to go to the water and they have to, outside the city, to go to a nachal, to a stream. They have to behead the eglah, the calf, and they have to make a proclamation that we didn't spill the blood, meaning we had no idea that this person is here. Had we been here, we would have protected him. And that's what you do until you find the murderer, and that's sort of an atonement. Sounds like a terribly strange law, but it's not a very strange law. It's actually very profound and it has a great impact on society. So the problem is, you find a corpse lying. Who travels alone? In those days, if you had any money or any wealth or any status, you didn't travel alone. You travel with other people, right? Abraham wants to go to the binding of Isaac. He takes his son Isaac. He takes also 2 lads. You have to have 2 helpers. You don't go alone. It's dangerous to go alone. So if you're going alone, you're obviously not an important member of society. What happens when a not an important member of society gets killed? Nobody cares. Nobody cares. So it's a cold case. So it's open. So there's a murder. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. So what this mitzvah is designed to do is designed to draw attention to the murder, and it also. So first of all, it gets into the press. If it gets into the press, the high court has to come and they have to measure it. They take a cow and create a ceremony, and everyone comes to watch the ceremony. So first of all, awareness. That's how the information about this murder is passed around, and then people could try to find the murderer. But in other words, the awareness is step number 1. In addition to that, there's a mitzvah that where they kill the calf next to the spring, which is obviously the most fertile land and the best land to plant is next to the river. That area, that crime scene, is not allowed to be planted forever until they find the murderer. In other words, now there's incentive to search for the murderer, because otherwise you can't use this land. Well, that's the mitzvah. In any case, Joseph, according to the Medrash, Jacob is telling this mitzvah to Joseph when he sends him off 22 years earlier to meet the brothers. Now, 22 years later, when the verse says they told him everything that Joseph said, first of all, he didn't believe. They told him everything that Joseph said. What did Joseph say? He told them about this mitzvah, that the last thing I studied with my father was this mitzvah. When Jacob hears that, he knows that it must be Joseph. And that's the meaning of Vayarata Agalot. He saw the wagons. But Agalot could mean the calf, because the same word Eglah could be Agalah. It depends how you read it. Depends on the vowels, but the Torah has no vowels, right? So you can read it Agalot, which is wagons. You can read it Eglah, which is the calf. And that's what the Medrash says. So he has the secret sign that he knows that this was what Joseph, this was Joseph, and that's why he believed it. So we'll take Vicky's question, but now this is a Medrash. There are many layers of commentary on this Medrash. What's the significance of this? So we have a lot we could talk about this for a minute or two, but in the meantime, go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. My question is, why did Jacob studied or Israel studied the law or Torah with only one son, not with other sons? And was there a pattern when he because he saw his leadership role that he studied with Joseph more than with other children? And maybe that will kind of shed some light on the parenting role in general. Even when you see one son is more like inclined to accept the study, but you have to think about other sons as well.
Yeah. So I think you're right. If you go all the way back to page 199 in the Art Scroll, beginning of Vayeshev, the verse says like this: Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons. And why? It says, Ki ben skunim hulo. What does that mean? So the Art Scroll translates, since he was a child of his old age. That's what the Art Scroll translates. Rashi has two interpretations. First interpretation is he was a child born to his old age. But that can't fully explain it. Why? Because Benjamin was actually born after Joseph. So if he likes the one born to his old age, he likes the youngest one, he should like the Benjamin more than Joseph. So Rashi says like this. Rashi says Onkelos, which is the first Aramaic translation to the Torah, which is almost like 1,000 years before Rashi. Onkelos explains Bar Hakim Hulei, Aramaic for he is a very wise son. And Rashi continues, everything that Jacob studied when he was in the yeshiva of Shem va'Ever. Shem is the son of Jacob, so there was a tradition that Jacob studied Torah, and says he sat in the tents. Which tents? Jacob was a man of the tents. Which tents? So he studied in the study halls of Shem and Aver. Shem and Aver was this Shem is the son of Noach, and Aver was his son. So apparently there's a tradition about monotheism that was passed on through Noach's son Shem to the subsequent generations, and Jacob received wisdom from them. Says that Rashi from the Medrash, second interpretation, when he says Ben Zkunim, Zaken can mean old age, but in biblical Hebrew, Zaken is also an acronym for Zeh Shekana Chachma, one who acquires wisdom. So old age is a synonym for wisdom. In other words, he passed all his wisdom to him. So you're right, he was studying with him more than other people. Now that could be a problem. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's just the reality as it's explained in the Medrash.
What is the acronym again?
Zeh Shekana Chachma, the one who acquired wisdom. Zeh Kana Chachma. In fact, I hate to say this to you, but when the Torah says "V'hadarta pnei zaken," honor the elderly. V'hadarta pnei zaken, honor the face of the elderly. The rabbis say it means honor the scholar. And there's a whole thing. How do you know that you're supposed to honor an elderly person even if he's not a scholar? So we have an answer. We have other verses, but I'm just saying you see that for them, wisdom is synonymous with old age. So you say old age, you mean old age. Of course, the old people are wise. But even a young person who's wise, you also have to honor. So that's the Jewish. That's within that's in the Jewish culture. If you want to see it in English, he quotes it. The Art Scroll also translates this. They translate this Rashi on Vayeshev. If you see Ben Skunim, page 199. A child of his old age, Joseph was born in Jacob's old age, which was why he was felt greater affection for him. Rashi. Although Benjamin was even younger than Joseph, he was born 8 years later, and during those years, Jacob developed an enduring love for Joseph. Okay. Alternatively, Joseph was a wise son to him, following the Talmudic dictum that the word zaken is a contraction of zeh shekana chachma, one who acquired wisdom. Whatever Jacob learned in the academy of Shem and Eber during his 14 years there, he transmitted to Joseph. Rashi quoting Onkelos.
But Zaken ends with a nun. You said Chachma.
So zeh shekana, zeh kana acquiring.
But Chachma.
You're right. The Chachma is not there. I'm sorry. What am I going to do? That's what the rabbis say. You can sue me. But yeah, you're right. It's not a full. It's an abbreviation.
We don't have that relationship.
No, I mean to say you're right. What am I going to tell you? I hoped you wouldn't realize. I hope you wouldn't ask the question because I have nothing to
I was
answer.
waiting to hear.
I have nothing.
Second, third time.
I got nothing to answer. I apologize.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Rabbi. So, but even if Jacob sensed that Joseph is more wise, but I think if he would study with other children, would be soften the tragedy a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that he's showing favoritism, and the question is, you have the image of giving him the colored garment. Was it the garment, or was it what the garment represented? And part of what the garment represented was the close relationship, and the close relationship is he gave him what was valuable to him. What was valuable to him to study, right? Study time is valuable,
And also Torah lessons would be helpful for them to learn.
That's true. That's a good point. Okay. Now, so let's go back to this medrash. Why is Jacob telling Joseph when they're leaving of all the future of all the mitzvot? That's what he remembered to tell Joseph. That, by the way, there's a mitzvah, someone gets killed. Like, why is he telling him that mitzvah? So there's all kinds of connections, but I guess the general idea is like this. The theme of that connection, the theme of that mitzvah, part of the theme of the mitzvah is that the elders of the city have to get up and they have to say, our hands did not spill this blood. In other words, they have to declare that they did everything they can to protect this person. And the commentaries explain what they're saying is, we did not see him, because had we seen him, we would not send him off without food and without levaya, without an escort, without people escorting him. Okay? So what the mitzvah really says, it's not so much, the mitzvah is not just telling you, this is what happens if someone dies. Someone gets killed and you found the corpse. What the mitzvah is really, it's a preventative measure. The elders know that if someone dies, they're going to be dragged down. They're going to have to say, we had no idea that this guy's here, and we had no idea that a person is traveling, and we had no idea that we have to provide protection for this person. In other words, they're to blame, unless they could say it wasn't us. They need atonement. Who needs atonement? The elders need atonement. So this mitzvah is designed basically to tell the elders of the city, you're responsible not just for what's in your city, but you're responsible for people traveling outside your city, and you have to escort people outside the city also. Now, why does escorting people outside the city help? Number one, it helps because you're protecting them as far as you're going. You don't have to travel with them all the way, but you're protecting them some part of the road. But also, it's that the people don't feel alone. And also, who's vulnerable, right? Who are the bad guys? Who are the thieves going to attack? They're going to attack people that they see are traveling alone. They have no friends. They have no people care about them. So, in other words, according to the Medrash, Jacob is escorting Joseph and telling him the mitzvah about escorting. You see what I'm saying? Why was he telling him then about the idea about the Eglah Arufa, the beheaded calf? Because he was doing the mitzvah right then. What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is when someone travels to go with him some portion of the road, and by that show the person that you're cared for. And if anybody's looking to see who to attack, this guy, don't attack this guy. He's cared for. People are going to look after him and try to pursue the killer. So the point here is that Joseph does that. Jacob is doing that for Joseph. So while he's escorting him, he tells him about this mitzvah. Now, some people say what's really happening is they tell him everything that Joseph did. Joseph also escorts the brothers. And that's what he tells them. This is what my father told me that you're supposed to escort. See what I'm saying? So in other words, this is an important point because that was the mitzvah they were engaging in at the time. Then there's the mystical interpretation. Go ahead.
Just thought about this, but being alone, Jacob sends Joseph alone.
Yes. Yeah, but first of all, you see that was a problem, right?
Right.
But second of all, it's not just that the mitzvah is you have to escort the person. It doesn't mean you have to travel with them. If you're traveling to LA, you have to go with them the entire way. It doesn't mean that. It means that you have to be out of your way to show the person he's not lonely himself, and also to show, like I said, if you're traveling somewhat with somebody else, then I guess the thieves, they had a way to know that we want to attack someone who's lonely, who doesn't have family, who doesn't have connections in society, because then nobody will investigate, no one will pursue. So when they know that this person is a person who's being escorted, then this person is a person being cared for, then that person is protected. That's the theory.
That's why even when people come to your house, like when they leave, you're supposed to walk.
That's the thing. That Levaya, the Rambam talks about this. That more important than inviting guests, you have to invite them, you have to feed them, you have to give them to drink. Says the Rambam that escorting to the door and maybe a little beyond is more important than anything you do in the home. Why is it more important? So the idea is that it's taking away the feeling of loneliness, right? You could live in a city with thousands of people, you can feel alone. But if somebody walks with you and cares about you and goes the extra step and walks you outside the door, right? They're not just, okay, go. No, when you're leaving, I'm with you, I'm here with you. That represents an emotional connection. And that's the greatest kindness, more than giving a person a biological need, but the idea to free the person of the loneliness. And that's what Jacob is supposed to be doing to Joseph. Joseph is supposed to be doing it. Joseph is doing it to the brothers. And of course, the irony is that the 10 brothers didn't do that. They did the opposite, right? They didn't protect their brother. They didn't look out for him. They didn't. It's the exact opposite of making the person feel connected to you. Selling him as a slave is the exact opposite. Okay, that's for that.
Maybe because they didn't study that.
Maybe it's now we're blaming the father. Okay, fine. You want to blame the father, blame the father. Okay. I tell my kids, you can blame me for anything you want. It's not a problem. I'm here to take the blame. There's a more mystical interpretation is, I say it as a joke. the Vayarata Agalot Sheshalach Yosef. So there's a mystical interpretation, a Hasidic interpretation from Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. Agala is also wagon. Wagon is the wheel. And the wheel is the turning wheel. That's what he sees. This story is the turning wheel that Joseph on one hand goes all the way down, and from that lowly space, he climbs back up. And that's what Jacob sees. Why is that so important? I'm going to go a minute or two over time. It's so important because you see, on one hand, Jacob is running to go to Egypt. He says, I want to go. I want to see my son before he dies. And he's called Yisrael, which means Vayisa Yisrael, the Chol HaShiloh, verse 20, chapter 46, verse 1. So Israel set out with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba. Israel means it's the more elevated name. It's the name of redemption, not the name of exile. So Israel is traveling to Egypt. He comes to Beersheba. All of a sudden, he becomes Jacob, and he's afraid. You see, he's afraid to go. So Israel is Jacob basically, on the journey, he realizes, oops, I'm going to see my son, but I'm also starting the Egyptian exile. Because they knew in the tradition that the tradition to Abraham that there's going to be the exile for 400 years. So now he has mixed emotions. It's a happy event for his personal family, but for the family as a whole, for the future, it's actually a very sad event. So he doesn't want to go. So let's read what Hashem tells him. Let's turn to page 259, verse 3, chapter 46, verse 3. I'm going to go a minute or two over time. I apologize. And he said, so God appears to him at night. Let's go back. Let's read one verse before that. Page 257. Verse 2. Let's read verse 1. Why not? Page 40, chapter 46. So Israel set out with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba, where he slaughtered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in night visions, and he said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. It's funny. God spoke to Israel, and he said, Jacob, Jacob. Right? You see here that it's two different names. Now he's going to exile. He's going to become a Jacob. And he said, I am the God of your father. Have no fear of descending to Egypt, for I shall establish you as a great nation there. I shall descend with you to Egypt, and I shall also surely bring you up, and Joseph shall place his hand on your eyes, whatever that means. Okay, what's the irony here? The irony here is there was a promise to Abraham. What was the promise to Abraham? That your sons are going to be, your descendants are going to be a great nation, like the stars, like the earth. Where did that happen? It didn't happen in Israel. Israel, they were 70 people, no big deal. Only in Egypt, when they're in exile, that's when they multiply in a tremendous way. Okay? So that's the irony. Now, he doesn't want to go. He says, don't worry, specifically there, in the exile, you're going to become a great nation. That's, okay. Joseph will place his hand on your eyes. Literally, I have no idea what that means. What does that mean? I guess he'll live longer than you. He'll protect you. Maybe what it means is Joseph will give you the right perspective, because the story of Joseph is the story of Jewish people. In Egypt, that's where Joseph rises to power. In Egypt, specifically when being a slave, that's where he rises to become the emperor of Egypt, the viceroy of Egypt, and therefore the ruler of the world at that time. Okay? So what we're saying is that Jacob himself is going to learn from Joseph's example, because Joseph is the sort of the prototype of what's going to happen to the rest of the Jewish people. That's specifically when you go down to Egypt, which is the descent. But in the descent, that's where you're going to grow, and that's where you're going to rise to power. And that's exactly what happened to the Jewish people. He says, L'goy gadol, God says, I'm going to make a great nation over there, not in Israel. Why that has to be, I don't know. But that's the pattern that happens with Joseph. That's the pattern that happens to the Jewish people as a whole. And often that's what happens, that in the time of challenge is when people grow and become the greatest they can be. So perhaps that's the circle. That's the agala. That's the wheel. That when you go down, you're really going up. And that's what Jacob sees, and that's what gives him the encouragement to go to Egypt, because, like God says, Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. He'll help you see the world from the proper perspective, and that is that specifically in the exile you can become a great nation. So that's the story in short. Thank you all for joining. Sorry for going 3 minutes overtime. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And next week, I don't think I'm going to be here in person, but I hope to be here on Zoom, God willing.
Yes, cool.
Shukayach. And
When he dies, they close the eyes.
that's a probably more literal interpretation. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so he'll help you. He'll be there when you pass on, right?
He'll be there as you pass.
As you pass on, when you pass. Yeah, you don't want to pass. You don't want to die alone, right? You want to be family or whatever, I guess. Okay, you don't want to die. Period. But that's another story. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.